you bring up a great point, and this is something David Icke mentioned 3 weeks ago, where was the increase in deaths? Since then, I've seen the mainstream media address this. I've seen New York Times show these little spikes in death rates going up in these different cities. So I've seen them show what looked like evidence of increased mortality.
Yeah, well, the way that you display the information can really affect the perception. There's from day to day and week to week, there's variations in the number of deaths reported. So if you look on a small time scale and you see a spike here or a spike there, it could give the impression that overall there's an increase in mortality. But that's why I look at the year-to-date numbers, because that includes all of the deaths so far this year, which encompasses the entire period that we've been affected by this pandemic. And when you average those out, it sort of balances out the spikes, because there are also some weeks or days where there actually is a downward trend in the number of deaths. So you have to take all of those little perturbations into account and look at the total data set that's available, and that's where you'll really find the information.
Yeah, and both of us spent time at MIT in the late 80s, and I think if you, in any statistics class, you can be seen right away that data can be manipulated by how you present it on the graph or how you codify it. Everything that can be changed. What about this decreased mortality because of the lockdown? Is that an issue that can skew those results?
Well, it's kind of hard to say, because they're not keeping accurate records on the actual true cause of death. But you could certainly look at some possible areas where the death rate would be reduced. And certainly you mentioned one obvious one, which is decreased traffic accident fatalities. But all in all, being considered, that's actually not a big factor in the total mortality data. It's a relatively small number of deaths compared to the leading causes of death. The other thing that is really important to consider is that people are getting less medical treatment right now. And based on some studies from Johns Hopkins and one published in the Journal of the American Medical Association, medical care could actually be qualified as at least the third leading cause of death in the country. So if people are taking less medications or getting less medical care, then those number of deaths would be reduced. And there have been a couple of studies, one from Israel, and I think one is actually from England, where there was doctors went on strike. And during those strikes, there was actually also a reduced mortality. So one could, look at the numbers from those studies and do a comparative analysis, but it's really, there are some fudge errors to do that kind of analysis, since the current data is so incomplete.
All right, so let me just stop you there really quick. So for people listening, you're saying medical care causes deaths in people. Can you go deeper on that? Because this is counterintuitive to everything we've been taught.
Yes, it is. So the study from the Journal of the American Medical Association I'm referring to talks about deaths attributable to prescription drugs, which are not used for an overdose, but taken as directed. So they're not taking extra by mistake or given the wrong dose by mistake. They're taking these medications as directed. And they estimate that annually in the United States, there's approximately 128,000 deaths attributable to prescription drugs. And just to give you one example of how that might be, if you look at Tylenol, a common drug, in Europe, you have paracetamol, which is related to that. Tylenol is acetaminophen. In the United States, pretty much every year, there are about 400 deaths that occur from taking Tylenol as directed. So what the research has done is they've looked at a number of different drugs and made an estimate. And the reason they have to make an estimate, and they were very conservative in their estimation, is because there's no reporting or case capturing of deaths due to healthcare. So the CDC monitors deaths due to all causes except this one. So they really only look at illnesses and disease. They don't look at what's called iatrogenic causes, which is caused by the healthcare itself. The other study that is very prominent is from Johns Hopkins, and where they looked at what they called medical errors. And I won't get into their definition of that, but let's just trust their results. And they they once again estimated 250,000 deaths a year from medical errors. Now, there are many other ways that the healthcare can result in fatalities, but these haven't been looked at as carefully, so I'll just not count them in my analysis. But if you combine these two numbers, 250,000 and 128,000, you get 378,000 deaths a year from healthcare. And that puts it above respiratory illnesses as the third leading cause of death, according to the CDC's numbers.